information. Is that what you're seeing? Am I sharing the right page? So
we see the title page.
Okay, excellent. That's what I was looking for. Okay, so that you saved me a plenty here, so I don't have to do it. People want to ask, they will ask, or they can just Google. I'm also easily accessible, as probably people should know. This is my email, gg_nyc@yahoo.com, LinkedIn. My website is also pretty accessible. I run a few global communities as well, so that's an easy way to get me. And also, I have a free Slack channel if you need something very immediate. You want a very short cycle time on between the question and answer. That's the way to go. Okay. First thing first, right? So we're talking here about what? Budget and forecasting. So first, I want to be very clear on this. I mean, I haven't invented some of these things. These things have been around for almost decades, and some people are really knowledgeable folks that have been entrepreneurs have done a lot of work that I'm just picking up, bits and pieces and putting them to work for me as needed. So first, hopefully everyone understands that challenges presented by rigid and annual budgets have been known not for a week or for a month or for a year. They have been known for decades. The biggest contributor, and by the way, all of the above bullets, such as traditional budgets representing a retrospective look on past situation, not good forecasting mechanism, time-consuming processes that are really playing the role of a backbone of conventional traditional budgets. Rigidity and a yardstick approach to assess individual performance that's oftentimes linked to budgets and finances. These are not good things. These are obvious but not good things. This gentleman, in fact, is someone to whom I owe my personal learning of budgeting, especially in Agile organizations. Regardless of scaling or descaling, his name is Jart Bogsnes. He's from Scandinavia. He is actually one of the key figures there, and he has a long experience in financial industry as well as oil industry. So if you ever want to pick up a book to read about Agile budgeting, I would recommend his. He has been my speaker as well. I have invited him a couple of times to New York City LS community. So just so you understand, we're not reinventing the wheel here. We know that this has been around for a while. So let me first introduce this very simple formula, and I'm sure everyone on the call has enough knowledge of basic calculus, and this should not be a problem to figure out how to do, right? You got an hourly rate of a laborer. If you multiply it by number of hours someone has performed work, you're going to end up with a cost of labor. Maybe it's simplified. Maybe there are some coefficients and some additional functions that need to be addressed, but these are the primary variables of the equation, right? So for instance, if I was performing work and if I charge different fees for different types of work, I would just have to do the average and the calculation will be straightforward. This is obviously much easier when one person does work. And this is just easy to estimate how much it's going to cost. But what if it's done by the whole team? So in other words, you have multiple people involved. Furthermore, what if you have multiple teams involved? So now you have not just one person who's got a fixed hourly rate, and you can do straight math. You got a bunch of people. Now, first, let me introduce you to something that may or may not be familiar to you, depending on what kind of personal thinking tools you've been using. I use a lot what's referred to, oh, by the way, I'm sorry, let me just animate this a little bit. This is an average rate, and this is an estimated labor hours, and this, of course, can translate into a budget, right? That should be straightforward. So my personal tool of choice when I need to understand what's happening with the system is a system modeling approach, right? I like to model the system to understand what's really going on underneath, what's happening underneath in the hood. Let me give an example how it gets done in real life, whether you're a coach / Scrum Master or just someone who wants to explore the system and understand the bolts and nuts of it. By the way, what's here down below is just a legend how to read it, how to read the diagram. But the diagram is pretty straightforward. You have a system optimizing goals. First is to share rewards amongst individuals, and the second goal is to increase velocity, feature velocity of a team. Now check this out here at the top. If you have rewards that are dangling like a carrot or candy, there will be a pressure on individuals to game the numbers. So if you worked around long enough, you would know. Once you've been shown an incentive in the form of bonus or some sort of a monetary incentive, you will be playing with the system. You will be doing something that that can get you to that high bonus. Same thing, if you can do this by exhibiting high velocity, this is going to be like a proxy effect. You're going to have a lot of pressure. What do we do to increase velocity? Someone can just say, okay, straight up, you have to increase output. You have to increase velocity, team. Guess what? You will be gaming the system. The value of reward, the higher it is, the more opportunity, the more probability you will have of gaming the system. And this will decrease the degree of dysfunction. So think of it this way. Is it a good variable or is it a bad variable? Good versus good, bad versus bad. Goodness leads to goodness. That's direct relationship. Goodness leads to badness. This is not such a good relationship. And of course, this is going to have an opposite effect on your ability to guide or improve the system, because if you have a lot of measurement dysfunction, in other words, your metrics or your numbers are not reliable, then what kind of, so you can't really guide the system. Your expectation should be rather low. Here's another example. Feature velocity is high. Guess what? It's like a bumpy road. The faster you drive, the more defects are going to be produced. The more defects are going to be produced, the slower you're going to drive. So this is the opposite effect. It's a stabilizing loop here. So what you're looking at here, it's called a system model to understand what is really going on under the hood. And this is a very powerful tool for coaches and for organizational design consultants. I use it quite a lot in training and in mentoring and one-on-ones. So this is just to introduce you to the tool. And now let's take a look at the actual problem we have on hand. So with the system optimizing goal of being able to do accurate budgeting, right? Let's take a look at this variable. Likelihood of doing an accurate budgeting is impacted by something that's upstream from it. Likelihood of having accurate estimations. Would you not agree? So in order to budget something right, you have to estimate it. Now, consistency and reliability of estimation techniques by people and teams would be upstream from that. So in order to estimate right, we need to have certain things in place that will make this estimation process even accurate. If you bring together a bunch of people that have nothing in common and ask them to estimate something, they will not do a good job. Here's an example. Here's another variable. Likelihood that too many wrong people that are really not engaged, not involved in real work, being asked to estimate. It's going to have an opposite effect on accuracy. This brings another big point: proper team design and duration of people working together. Right? So it's going to have a direct positive effect on consistency and reliability of estimation. That's why we want long-lived teams, not churning and burning of people coming and going like a revolving door. And it's going to have an opposite effect on likelihood that too many people will be involved in estimations. Why? Because you got a set number of people. You have stable teams. Churning is lower. Teams are stable, and of course, you have fewer people coming and going. So this is a good thing. So this is a good thing. This is a good thing. This is not a good thing. So this is a bad thing that has an opposite effect on another good thing. Every variable in the system, you can pretty much say, do I want more of it or do I want less of it? Now, organizational ability to distinguish and see value in real scaling, for example, of Scrum, and being able to separate a good scaling of goodness, of agility, from bad one would be a positive impact on proper team design and, of course, We want more of this because it's going to bring more of this. And of course, existence of proper product definition, proper backlog, and customer centricity is going to have a very strong impact on this variable. Okay, so why are we doing this even? We want to understand the system. We want to understand what's really underlying. And this is never the best choice. I'm sorry, this is never the only choice for how to explore the system, but this is my personal choice of selection, and I think it's pretty useful. Here's an example of managers estimating on behalf of workers. You will clearly do the job quickly. That's why it's called QF, quick fix. But accuracy of this is going to be not so high. So this is actually detrimental to estimation when you have managers or leads estimating on behalf of actual workers and on behalf of actual doers. Although they may sound like very sophisticated, we know what our people are doing well, then you have them do it instead of you trying to speak on their behalf. So the real questions we really need to answer here, really, we have to change, we have to shift the conversation a bit. The real questions we need to answer are the following. What are people working on? Who is estimating? Why are they even estimating in the first place? What's the driver? Is it just to produce the number, or there is something more to it? And how and often are they estimating? Do they estimate once in a quarter or once every half a year and keep this estimation static and hard-coded? Or do they do dynamic estimation and re-estimation as time goes by? Which is, of course, an indication of knowledge about agility and adaptiveness and incremental development. So this is just good old Scrum, right? We don't need to spend too much time discussing it. I'm sure everyone in the call understands Scrum. One backlog, one product owner, customer-centric, feature-centric development, stable, long-lived teams, cross-functional, cross-component-centric, and of course, PSPI, the end comes together from the whole team, right? But for that, we need actually a real team to do work. So I would like to take us through some of the dysfunctions and emissions, patterns of badness. So let's talk about some of the classic cases where accurate estimation by one team, let alone by multiple teams, is actually challenged. So in other words, we don't get what we expect. Here's one. Let's just say you have one team that is good at what they do, right? They work together, they're cross-functional, they estimate together, and they produce some numbers that could be later used for forecasting. Now, and guess what? They estimate in good old story points, right? Because everyone likes planning poker story point estimation. Now imagine you got another team that is different in structure, different skill set, different domain expertise, and they're actually working on something completely irrelevant. Now, unless these two teams work together, estimate together, speak the same lingo, trying to add estimates of one team to estimates of the other team, it's going to produce a very awkward number. It's going to produce like mixing water and oil or apples and oranges, right? You won't be able to produce a number that is reliable and consistent. Now, if you continue doing this copy pasting, right, and you may have a bunch of products in your body of work, with each team doing their own individual separate work, and just because all of these teams and all of these individuals report to the same manager does not justify adding a bunch of these estimates together and trying to forecast based on those, because you have created a hypothetical number. You will end up with a hypothetical number that is pretty much a shot from the hip in the dark. It can't really be mapped to anything that's tangible and anything that is consistent and normalized. So this is so you have a bunch of teams, of course, they roll up in the same department, and if you add things up, you're just going to end up with an unreliable number. So this is certainly not a good way to scale. And by the way, this is called copy-paste Scrum, or this is also called sometimes faux or fake Scrum, because 9 out of 10 times these teams are really not even feature teams. They're component teams that work on individual components that require tons of integration in the end. Okay, I typically see this in organizations that are really hooked on metrics and numbers and producing, just it's a numbers game. It's a system game, numbers game. I usually speak of this in terms of irony and jokes. Here's an example. If you don't have to translate this verbatim, but this is basically says you are going to do better than your annual plan by X factor, and with this level of precision of becoming agile by the end of the year, you're going to end up with a lot of system gaming. And this is another example. If you have individuals within your organization that are trying to compete for the maturity level, because I'm sure you've been around companies where you have different maturity levels, you may see this numbers game and competition competing for different rewards, and that's why you may end up with a very crazy number of maturity. This is really not reliable. Another example of fake Scrum. So we fake Scrum and fake attempt to scale. So this is option number one, and doesn't really require much interpretation because it's kind of clear, right? You have mini waterfall analysis designed and dev, and then only testing in the end with lots of fallout in the form of a massive integration. Now check this out. You got 5 teams sprinting concurrently, but they're really not working on cross-cutting features. They're working on components that also require massive integration in the end, right? Integration and bug fixing. So at the surface, it may look like, look, we've got 5 teams working side by side, so we can actually do, we can ask each team estimate their body of work, and we can just add them up, and it will translate in some number that we will forecast, and it will translate into a budget. Well, going back to the example we gave before, these are not comminglable numbers, so you can't really mix up what component A does, component A team does versus B versus C, because simply because you have very different language in estimation, so you're going to end up with numbers that really don't mix up. Why does this usually happen? Well, because your product definition is probably very weak, because doing Scrum efforts are maybe associated with trying to meet goals of the Agile transformation, some annual percentage, maybe because of territorial code ownership. That's right, Michael. So, there could be multiple reasons, right? There could be too many single specialty experts and very few T-shaped workers working. All of these underlying problems may give rise to these structured teams that wouldn't have much in common. And of course, when you have 5 ad hoc,
Megan pressed something, so that's why Jingen does. Yeah, what's that, Michael?
I don't know, maybe the gentleman could mute himself. The moderator could mute it. All right, maybe someone can ping in the chat. Right, so let me give you another example where you will end up with fake scaling. Unfortunate fake scaling. So take this as an example. If your organization is in business of copy pasting some, commercially available and in trend and in style methodology or an agile, so-called agile framework, you may end up with something like this. Well, let alone you take your organizational structure that is very vertical and flip it on its side and call it now a chapter, or you really are trying to create a community-like structure, but you end up retaining all of the problems and challenges of the original organizational structure. If that wasn't bad enough, you end up with a bunch of teams that are built from ad hoc groups, sometimes even represented by independent vendors. You staple them together and you call them now squads. Why squads? Well, because it's a trendy name, because what is really a squad? Why not a pod? Why not a team? Well, just because it's a trendy name. And you shove these bunch of squads into what's so-called a tribe, And what's a tribe now? Well, it's another trendy name that we borrowed from this small music company that actually tells us not to do it, but we still copy and paste it. And now you have this bunch of groups, not really teams, working on the same huge body of work. We call it a tribe. Most likely, it used to be an old portfolio of stuff. Now we relabel it with a new term. And if we try to estimate this, we're not going to be doing anything different from what we have been doing for months and years. So this is really not a good way to, not a good way to scale. So we're talking about the underlying problem of scaling, because like we said, if we have a problem with estimating work and forecasting and budgeting work by one team, now we're at the level where we have maybe 6 times 5 times 4, 24 teams. Imagine the degree of inaccuracy and variability you're going to introduce in the system, right? So this cumulative estimation by these teams will be extremely, extremely inaccurate. And although on the surface it may look like you're playing with numbers and it all rolls up on a slide, we'll look at these teams that roll up into the, this large box called the tribe. Under the surface, it's really not reliable. Here's another example of very unfortunate organizational design and attempt to scale. And by the way, the whole merit of scaling is not a good one, because we shouldn't be trying to scale. We should be actually descaling. I'm going to say a little more on that just in a bit. So you got a bunch of teams, right? And typically, if you want a short cycle time and short feedback loop between a team and a customer, it should be a straight line, right? They should be very close. Proximity should be very high degree of proximity. But what if you got these, arbitrary blue boxes that I'm drawing around my teams, managers and conductors and coordinators and rags and metrics and KPIs and a bunch of siloed organizational structures, and now you got the multiple layers of translation. And you may feel and sense some elements of irony to this, right? I'm not naming what this is, but you can probably sense it. And by the way, this is just version 348.54. There will be more common. You will be paying for every single version that comes out. So with this kind of layered structure, the degree of convolution and the length between real customers and real doers, real teams, is extremely long. So this is a longer shot for me to explain. Now try to explain to this customer why they ended up with these estimates and forecasts. Budgeted forecasts would be based on those. Well, this information went through so many different channels of translation and through so many different layers of interpretation. How accurate could that be? I mean, one thing, you go straight up and you talk directly to your customers and users. And the other thing, when teams estimate and things get rolled into projects, programs, and portfolios and get fudged, and numbers change so badly that you end up with something that's extremely not reliable. So, of course, cumulative estimation by these teams is not going to be too accurate. Oh, and by the way, just as an FYI, with these kind of complex frameworks and scaling approaches, what you end up seeing down below are really not feature teams. Feature teams would be cross-functional, cross-component, et cetera, Those would be most likely just component teams that work very ad hoc and very independently, and obviously they estimate independently too. Another potential risk you may see is with what's called fractal scaling. Fractal scaling, so if you know the optical tool called kaleidoscope, you twist it and you have very nice, very cool looking crystals, colored crystals. It actually looks very pretty. Now, essentially what you're looking at right now is a fractal design by multiple teams. Each team has their own TOO. TOO is really not a good thing to have. TOO is not a product owner. It's a team output owner, someone who is responsible for the volume of work that's being produced. And there's a lot of excessive, massive, and mandatory coordination that happens in between teams. and in between these different constellations. Typically, it gets done through Scrum of Scrums and Scrum of Scrum of Scrums and Scrum of Scrum of Scrum and Scrum, and you break your tongues how many Scrums through Scrum Masters. It doesn't get executed by actual doers, by teams. There's a lot of dependency on Scrum Master coordination, which means teams do not work close with each other. I'm going to make this just in passing, this statement. If you really want to understand the underlying challenge and problem you will see with team-specific so-called product owners, the better name for it would be TOO, team output owners. You may want to play this video. I can share this with you separately if you reach out. It's by Michael James of Seattle Scrum, which is a pretty informational and pretty, aha moment kind of video. So just to, again, to say, with this kind of organizational design, with multiple teams, private backlogs, you will end up so many different estimations happening ad hoc and independently. Of course, coordination overhead and local optimization by each component team would be also detrimental to the system. Will be certainly not, almost inevitable. If you have so much coordination and so much unnecessary orchestration, you're going to have lots of local optimization in the system. So, of course, cumulative estimation by these kind of teams is not going to be reliable. This one I'm going to say just in passing. Scaling by contractually bound vendor groups. I'm sure you've seen this before. You got a bunch of vendors working for your client company, you're the client. You have engagement leads representing these vendors. So you end up talking not to real doers, you talk to their technical leads and engagement managers, engagement leads, the best of the best of the best people that actually know how to speak English. Sometimes you don't get these vendor people that actually speak English, good English, so you end up with people that probably understand some code, but they cannot communicate with customers. How bad is that, huh? So you end up actually having people, managers speaking and managing and providing estimates on behalf of their own people to your client company. Then imagine now you got these vendors, these vendor people being almost like stapled together into so-called teams. They're really not real teams because a team has a very specific definition. So these are like mostly groups that are joined by either by a contract or by some sort of a reporting. And with that, you can't really rely much on on what they say because they really don't even get to speak. They just do mundane work with lots of dependencies and lots of excessive management. So this is going to be probably very far from real scaling. And cumulative estimation by these kind of teams, of course, is not going to be accurate because it all goes through multiple chains of command and multiple layers of translation. And then, of course, all of the above will require a lot of excessive coordination, orchestration, delegation of responsibilities, dependency management by managers, of course, and those cost money. And therefore, will lead to errors, omissions, finger pointing, blame gaming, and estimation, and it will lead to, of course, the budgeting, and will subsequently lead to financial miscalculation, budget cuts, and force reduction. This is another way to look at the system, right? Because you introduce these problems all the way upstream. Of course, it's going to translate all the way down there. So you may think, why did we end up where we are? Well, because you started off in a very inappropriate way, let's put it that way. So it doesn't mean that we cannot have a budget cut for some other reasons, but here we are clearly running a different problem, and we need to do everything we can to avoid it. Then of course, even if you're an expert in all of these great estimation techniques, and I can tell you, I've done a plenty over years, and I can almost assure you that all of these are some are more advanced, less advanced, but they're really helpful, but under certain conditions. You really need to have proper conditions for these to work. If they are being applied to wrong teams or that are teams in name only, then it is highly unlikely going to get much benefit of all of these, right? this becomes almost like, you put, these 4 gadgets, pretty advanced, pretty sophisticated gadgets, you put it on the tricycle. I mean, what good does it do? I mean, there's no gas, there was no altitude. You don't need to measure altitude. You don't need to measure oil pressure because these, or barometric pressure. None of these parameters exist in a bike, in a tricycle. So all these advanced techniques, and we sometimes see teams digressing into these, and Scrum Masters almost like being intoxicated. Oh my God, and I have to give them the benefit of the doubt. They're trying their best, but they're applying these advanced estimation techniques to teams that by definition cannot produce anything accurate. It's almost like putting a saddle on a cow. You're not going to make it into an Arabian horse. It's going to remain to be a cow, right? So it's not like we shouldn't be trying to estimate and based on those estimates forecast. It's just in order for us to do this right, we need to have right foundation. We need to have right teams. We have to have properly built teams. For that, of course, we need a conscious approach to the topic of organizational design. If we kind of brush it off and say, well, this is too important, this is too serious for us to challenge, we can't change org design, because these large commercially successful frameworks, why do you think they're money makers for their creators, like multi-billion dollars, I think? Well, because they don't challenge much and they're super comfortable for organizations to unpack and install. That, of course, you can put a saddle on a horse, on a cow, and you may pretend this is a racing horse, but it's not. Okay. So are there any alternatives? Well, first of all, in good old Scrum, if we just had a very small company with a very small product that was worked upon by a single team that was cross-functional, cross-component centric. It's a mouthful. A team that was able to work on all the components. Besides, every member of that team was able to speak multiple languages, multiple technology languages. Every member had some good knowledge about functional domains and business itself. Then, of course, that team together could go on the journey of estimation, by using a planning poker or beanie beads or dog breeds or, whatever the arbitrary technique you can think of. And based on that, they could crunch numbers and come in, and if they did things as per those advanced techniques, because this is the whole different conversation, how to take, one sprint estimation that's done in sprint 25 and 26 and 27 and apply it to the whole backlog and make this into a more reliable forecasting mechanism. There are ways to do it. We're not discussing it today, but there are ways to do it. But in order for this to happen, you need right people at the table. aka you need to have right teams in place. Okay. Here we have 3 to 9 people that are expected to estimate together, even if not everyone can do their work. You may in fact have some people that are experts in back-end Java, but understand a little something about front-end. So when they discuss it with front-end developers, at least they speak common lingo, right? So of course, ideally you want to have everyone to be able to do everything, but in reality, this may be like, could be like a nirvana state, but we should be striving towards. But at least if you have all of the skills on the team and everyone understands what is done by their colleagues, by their teammates, at least this way we have a higher chance of estimating accurately. But what if you have multiple teams? What if you have really like maybe 5 or 7 or 8 teams? Large-scale Scrum is Scrum. So this is not just yet another scaling methodology or another scaling framework. In fact, it is almost mislabeled. It's mislabeled because large-scale Scrum is not about scaling. It's about organizational descaling, which means in order for us to scale goodness, we need to remove anything and everything that sits in between and makes it not so good. So for instance, if you got too many managers and too many conduits and translators in between teams, in large-scale Scrum, we kindly ask them to step away so the teams can talk to teams. individuals can talk within teams directly as opposed to being put through multiple layers of translation. In large-scale Scrum, multiple teams do not do their own Scrum individually separately, like in a silo. In large-scale Scrum, real teams sprint together on the same product. So if you wanted to use my analogy, which may not be the best analogy, but that's what really sticks to me. You got 5, 6 different horses and different jockeys running at their own pace and trying to beat each other. This is really not large-scale Scrum. This is different strategy, different mission, different vision. Everyone does their own thing. However, this would be Scrum-like event because you got multiple horses pulling in the same direction, on the same cadence, being guided by the same jockeys. Although maybe a jockey is not the best analogy with a product owner, but at least gives you an idea, right? Same mission, vision, same unified goal and purpose. Concurrently, on the same cadence, with lots of coordination, integration that happens directly, not through conduits and translators. These teams work out of the same backlog for the same product owner. Not multiple backlogs, not multiple team output owners. Those things are going to be completely unsupportive of what we're trying to say here. This gives these teams ability to refine during refinement sessions or anytime together, plan together, and coordinate directly, not through multiple conduits and translations and translation layers. And of course, they will estimate together as well. This is a big key thing. In large-scale Scrum, teams estimate together. Another way to look at this would be if you had a boat race. Wouldn't be really a race. That's actually not incorrect to say. It would be 5 tugboats rowing together, pulling in the same direction on the same product, having one product owner with scope and vision and setting strategic direction, and a bunch of users and customers defining, providing clarifications. Again, in large-scale Scrum, it's a much longer conversation. We clearly delineate between prioritization and clarification, who does what. Not to say too much about how teams are being structured. One thing you need to know, each team is almost a clone of another team. They may not be the same in size, but capabilities are the same. So in other words, when these 5 teams, how many people, maybe almost 30 people, maybe 25 people come together to estimate, they speak the same lingo. They speak the same language. They understand each other well, and they can produce a much more accurate estimation. So if you remember that formula that we talked about at the very beginning, going from estimations to budget and forecasting, this is it. If you have crappy numbers to start with, no matter how sophisticated your formulas are going to be, you're going to produce crappy numbers. So your crappy estimates are going to lead to crappy budgets and forecasts. So it really starts all the way upstream. Then you can go in further upstream to say, well, how do we get these accurate estimates? It is by team design. It is by org design. Okay. Now, just to give you a bit of an intel on how rich multi-team collaboration is in large-scale Scrum. These are very loaded, very generic images that will show you some of less events, large-scale Scrum events, which that are pretty much identical to Scrum events, with only one small add-on. But because of who goes and who does what and where, this becomes just a different ball game. So here is an example of a sprint backlog refinement, and this, again, not spending too much time discussing everything that you see here, but just take my word for this. In this yellow box, what this yellow box signifies is all teams together in the open space fashion estimate work together. And they're not even broken by teams. I come from blue team, Karen comes from the yellow team, Barbara from the green team. It doesn't matter. We end up mixing up our people in a very almost promiscuous way. Just there was a promiscuous programming. There was promiscuous refinement and estimation going on. So we normalize our understanding. We normalize our appreciation for size and complexity. Okay. During sprint planning, again, take my word for what you see in there in yellow. Teams break down work items further into small tasks together. And this is a great opportunity to find opportunities to work together. In large-scale Scrum, in fact, we say there is no such thing as a dependency. This is actually a bad word because it just has been given a bad name. We look for opportunities to work together. So it's totally not uncommon that during a sprint, a team member from Team Red in a red shirt and a team member from Team Green in a green shirt end up working together side by side on pair programming. Okay. During a review and retrospective, there were some other, these are just other places and times when there was a lot of cross-team collaboration and orchestration takes place. Here specifically, I was alluding to this yet additional and unique to less event, which you don't have in Scrum. It's called Oral Retrospective, where you have Scrum Masters and senior management, senior management and product owners and some very selected team representatives coming together and addressing organizational design issues. Okay, so these are just to give an example of some of these very rich opportunities to work together, not through delegates, not through managers or leads. Teams work directly with teams. Individuals work directly with individuals. Just to give an example of what this may look like, it's just a simple graphic, right? But even if you have multi-site development, people in Bangalore and Mumbai, a few teams there, and a few teams, by the way, entire teams are fully co-located, at least in the same time zone they should be. You really don't want to spread people across different time zones. But you may have multi-site. So you may have teams in Boston, and teams in Houston, Texas, and maybe a team in Sao Paulo or a team in New York. But obviously technology can bring people together. So estimation takes place even remotely, but by doors. Team members, actual people that do work. Everyone is involved, and the main goal is really not to produce that number that you can throw in some tool of record. The goal is to produce 3 C's: a card, conversation, and confirmation. You don't need to be too aggressive or too conservative when you estimate, because you don't even know whether or not you're going to pick up the item that you estimated. So there was really no bad incentive. Hey, I'm going to have to estimate it high because I'm going to end up working on it, and I don't want to be under the gun, under the pressure. Nothing like that. What happens here in in the product backlog refinement here in the yellow box, just enriches and makes the backlog better. Actual, picking up work and deciding who's going to do work, who's going to do what, happens here in planning. But up until then, we don't really know who's going to take what. So the degree of honesty and degree of accuracy in estimation is high because of psychological and human factor. There is no need to inflate an estimate, or there is no need to suppress an estimate because it's going to be done by someone else, not you. Okay. So where are we? So there are other ways to, of course, to coordinate a large-scale Scrum. This is just a pass-through slide, pretty loaded. We covered it during training. We don't have enough time to discuss it today. Some of the advantages of estimating when you work out of the same backlog for the same product owner on the same product by multiple teams. And by the way, in large-scale Scrum, we limit it to 8. There are reasons why we explain it during training, but it's based on more than a decade of experiments and experiences. So there's some of the benefits are here. What? Teams work synchronously together, side by side, on the same widely defined real product, not a surrogate, not a component of a product, a real product. They have shared understanding of work. This includes size and complexity. They establish more reliable estimation techniques because of that, because they rub shoulders a lot. They work together. They have the same product owner, not team output owners, not BAs or senior BAs or technical owners or technical leads pretending to be product owners. And of course, if you have only one person responsible for the whole product, then there will be high understanding of product vision and strategy. So of course, when it comes to strategic planning, you can get something much more accurate and reliable out of a true strategist, out of a true senior business person than 5 or 6 or 7 BAs responsible for output. Short cycle time and fast feedback loops. Why? Well, because everyone works together very closely, no translation layers in between. Better responsiveness to increased and decreased market demand. So what is agility? Some people think it's faster, some people think it's cheaper. It's be more adaptive, more reactive. If you understand, if you come from military background or maybe some, game or contact sports, you will probably understand this very, very, very well. Agility means being able to turn on a dime for a dime without breaking a leg. And that's what really makes these guys, these teams much more adaptive and more agile because they work so closely together. They quickly react to changes. And of course, close proximity to real customers and users. It will lead ultimately to better decision on funding and budgeting. Why closer proximity? Because less is not a scaling framework. Yes, it is a scaling framework, but it's not about scaling. It's about descaling. Yes, we end up with more than one team, sure, but how do we actually end up with one team? We remove everything that sits in between typically. If you had 40 people and they were all structured as component teams, you would have component owners, you would have integration managers, you would have BAs that are for each team, you would have many, many individuals that are usually unnecessary, but they are locally optimized and they exist because you have created unnecessary organizational complexity. But when you have real, true feature teams, and large-scale Scrum is feature-centric work, then all of this becomes unnecessary, so you remove it. So you flatten your organization, you simplify it, you descale. So large-scale Scrum is a really descaling framework. I'm going to pause and I'm going to open up. Feel free to ask questions. And if there are, I saw there were a bunch of coming through the chat. I didn't monitor, so maybe we can take it from there. Should I do it, or should I just look at those that say that they have a question mark to it? Or okay.
Yeah, I think Lana Barry has a question. How frequently is the overall retro held?
So retrospective, the overall retrospective takes place at the end of every sprint. So if we just go back for a second to these pictures, at the end of every sprint, each team has their own individual dirty laundry, closed doors type of meeting, a team-specific retro, which is no different from what we do in Scrum. Whatever findings we have in those blue boxes will only end up in a yellow box discussion if they are systemic and they are shared and common for multiple teams. Stuff that is team-specific stays there. We don't bring our dirty laundry and don't put it out to the open if we can manage it ourselves. However, if this is something that is system impacting organizational dynamics and requires senior management's involvement, then we escalate it, and these become topics for the overall retrospective. Well, we have proper people. We have these guys that are coaches. Yes, in large-scale Scrum, Scrum Master is a seasoned, full-time role, and we expect this person to be, very seasoned, very versatile, and this is a team-level coach, unquestionably. In fact, I make this delineation all the time. Senior managers, not first, second-line managers that are responsible for assigning tasks. No, we need heavy hitters here. People that can make changes to organizational problems or improve work problems. Of course, a product owner, and maybe you will have on occasions a team rep if there is an issue that we'll raise that is very technical and requires technical expertise. So to answer Lana's question, the overall follows retros, and it happens every sprint. What is Gemba? I think the answer was given by Elena. Thank you. Yes, Gemba is in Japanese is Genshu Genbutsu. Going where action is. So action where value gets created and where action is really, in lean manufacturing, it's the factory floor. In Scrum, it would be where teams develop.
Jean, someone asked, what are the benefits of less versus Scrum at scale?
I'm really not so good at comparing frameworks unless I'm absolutely explicitly asked. So what I was alluding to with this diagram, perhaps, if it wasn't obvious, I'll try to make it a little more obvious. This is probably an illustration of Scrum at scale. I don't want to compare it on all fronts because there's some good ideas in Scrum at scale. However, its fractal organizational design hasn't worked for me, and I've seen lots of omissions with it. For a couple of reasons. A, when you got, and by the way, this video is going to do an amazing job explaining why, with animations and jokes and fun. But in a nutshell, when you got teams represented by team-specific product owners, you will 9 out of 10 times end up with component teams doing work, not feature teams. And these so-called product owners are really not product owners, but they're team output owners. People that are responsible for, not for output, but not for outcome, but for output. Usually senior BAs, managers, technical leads, not real product owners. And with that comes, of course, an omission, you not being able to properly prioritize from a standpoint of real customer. And with that, of course, comes lots of excessive coordination, and it's not. It doesn't get done by teams themselves. It gets done by Scrum masters. So although it may look great on paper, Scrum of Scrums and Scrum of Scrums, it looks like almost like a pretty picture. In real life, it leads to lots of unnecessary coordination and orchestration. It's not like Scrum of Scrum is a bad technique. It's actually a pretty good technique if it's used skillfully. In large-scale Scrum, these guys, or gals, they can coordinate and they can meet on demand as much as they want, but it's not a mandatory event. Like, for instance, these guys, these Scrum Masters represent, they're only shown in this box, but they're present everywhere. They can huddle, they can meet. In fact, in large-scale Scrum, because this is a full-time job, one Scrum Master can be responsible for up to 3 teams. So it's really a job. And it requires a high degree of seasoning and a high degree of expertise and, coaching mindset and coaching stance.
Thanks, Jean. Do we have time for one more question?
Yes, absolutely. We do. And while I'm doing this, I'll probably switch to the I'm going to switch to the browser, because if people want to be pointed to the right place, I want to do it. Go ahead. What's the next question?
Yeah, so someone asked, for a 5-team organization, would it be single product owner or a group of product owners?
So for a 5-team organization, so I guess the question becomes, do these 5 teams work on 5 independent products, completely independent products? Or do they work on 5 components of the same product? And it's not for technology folks to say, although some technologists may have a good educated guess. You have to ask a customer. You have to approach this from a standpoint of a paying customer or internal user. Because if you end up with 5 teams, each working on a very siloed body of work that is really, even if it's feature-centric or product-centric, yeah, sure, you're probably going to end up with 5 independent product owners, but they're doing different work. I mean, these guys are building phones, and these guys are building bottles. So there's nothing in common. But if these guys build phone screens, and those other guys build phone, hard covers, then most likely these are different components of the same product. And now it raises a question: why are they being represented by different teams?
What would the implications be for multiple features of same product?
What would be the implications of having multiple featured teams working on the same product? Is that the question?
I believe so. I believe that was the question.
Should be it would be a reasonable approach, because if you have multiple teams all working on features out of the same backlog for the same product owner on the same product, that at any point in time, any team should be able to grab a backlog item from the top of the backlog in the order of business priority and execute it from soup to nuts. However, if we had, and some great images would be available perhaps here, but I don't think we have enough time for this. If you had a bunch of component teams working for the same product owner out of the same backlog, that most likely you would have this. Let me take another PDF, would be a little more colorful here, right? So different component teams working on different items out of the same backlog, which can't even be prioritized by a business person, because item number 4 represents a component and only teams see can touch it. Of course, it raises a question, why are these guys working on something that's so low priority? But these are not one or another. These are not the items you can prioritize, because these are component teams, component-centric development. This is where you see on the right-hand side feature-centric development, when every team can touch any of the components, and now these items become customer-centric, cross-component cutting, feature-centric items. And now our product owner is able to prioritize 1 versus 2 versus 3, because these are, this is business language now. These are real backlog items, real customer-centric backlog items, whereas these were just components, most likely technical tasks. And when you have this fractal team design with a team per product owner per team, most likely you end up with component teams working on these ad hoc components. And this is why you need so much integration and excessive coordination by third parties. It's a completely different concept here. By the way, all of these graphics are freely available, and there's more content on stuff that is relevant to this. So if people reach out, they can always get their answers. If I may, I'll share. You can go to my site and just drop me a note through it. Plus, there's a lot of large-scale Scrum references on the site, including pointers to case studies and to some other useful artifacts. Let's put it that way. Any more questions?
Yeah, I think we can take one more question. This one says, I've seen teams in the past gravitate and specialize in portions of the code base. Do you need to prevent this, and how do you do it?
Sure. I think I understand the question. Let me try to answer it twofold. There is nothing wrong. In fact, it's great if someone is a specialist. But we want specialists around. We actually like specialists in large-scale Scrum because we want people with expertise. But there's a difference between being a specialist and single function specialist. So if we have a specialist that also has some breadth and general knowledge in other skills, in other domains, this is who we want. If we get a specialist who is the only person who has a given skill and now becomes a bottleneck and a single throat to wrinkle, then we have created a risk. Well, first of all, we created a risk for the whole team, because if this person falls ill, we lost the skill. But also, this person may act and behave in ways that are really not desirable for the whole team. He or she may feel, okay, I'm a special case because I'm such a high degree expert. I call my shots. It will definitely impact your ability to estimate as a team. You will definitely have some downstream adverse impact on your ability to forecast and budget. So yes, absolutely. We want people with T-shaped people, and my camera is pointed below. You got people that have a strong core skill set, but also some breadth, some addition to their core skill set, secondary skill set. We want, lots of T people, T-shaped. There's also like M-shaped sometimes we call them, but that's something else. I'm happy to take another question if you would like.
Yeah, I think, yeah, we have two more. When a PO asks for a 3-month report as a Scrum Master, what exactly do you give?
So I would like to understand what a PO is going to be looking for. So a real PO wouldn't ask for this. Most likely it's not a real PO, but what would they be looking for in a 3 months report? Because it's a very loaded case here. First, I guess I'm going to be asking and answering on my own. If a product owner gets to see a potentially shippable increment of a product every sprint, this question becomes obsolete. I wouldn't be even asking for it if I was a PO, if I saw something shippable delivered to me every sprint. I mean, of course, there are different techniques and fancy calculations we could apply to forecast, to project how much work gets done. And we can use the cone of uncertainty and optimistic, pessimistic forecast. By the way, never communicate in terms of fixed everything, fixed budget, fixed timeline, fixed scope. That just it's a trap. Most likely it's going to be an omission. Always try to communicate within ranges. Between 5 sprints and 7 sprints, we're going to deliver this much, or we're going to deliver precisely on this date if you wish, but somewhere between 300 and 350 story points worth of work. So give a range at least on one end. But all in all, someone who is asking for 3 months report, they probably don't have much trust in what teams do. They probably have been screwed many times by not getting what they were asking for, by a lack of delivery. If you have a bunch of component teams with high probability of massive integration fallout and buggy code in the end, which obviously increases risks of not delivering, then most likely to do CYA, a product owner will digress and ask for some paper trail for a rainy day. But that would be just the reason why he or she is doing it. Because other than that, if you have a burn-up chart that's pointing, very scientifically to X number of points by a certain day in an optimistic and pessimistic way, like a cone of uncertainty, then what kind of paper trail do we need? Copy paste that graphic and off you go. You were talking about mechanics now, by the way, whether it's one team or multiple teams. Mechanics of forecasting are the same. Just more people, when more people are involved, there is a much higher risk of introducing variance or variability in the system, aka inaccuracy. And depending on how you work, you can either mitigate it and reduce it or dramatically increase it. In large-scale Scrum, because of the ways how people work, this risk, it doesn't get eradicated, but it gets reduced. So if nothing else, if an organization is very sensitive to past history of unfortunate forecasts and false promises, they may want to reconsider the way their teams work. Just because you're squeezing more reports out of people and forcing second-line managers talk to first-line managers, talk to team leads, talk to teams, you're not going to get more accuracy. You can bring, a firing squad, and you will end up with very precise numbers. But precision and accuracy is not the same thing. If I were to tell you I was born in the 19th century, in the past century, in somewhere between 1979 and 80, I would be very vague and I would not be very precise, but I would be accurate. But if I were to tell you I was born in 1989 on January 15th and 7:05 a.m., I'll be very accurate. I'm sorry, I would be very, very precise, but very off. So trying to squeeze more accurate estimates out of teams, it's an illusion. It's a false sense of security. It's a self-inflicted gunshot wound. You're trying to create an illusion of accuracy, which you have none of. And the more people you have doing this, the more problems you have. Right? Because they will be very, very, eager to produce those numbers and those reports. Those reports, for the most part, they're trivial. That's on reporting.
Thanks, Gene.
Sure.
All right, so it's 6:08. Did you have time for more questions, or I can also give them the
Yeah,
email address that they can send questions to?
sure. By the way, notice how I named my because I started, but it's really shared shared commodity. Large scale Scrum in New York City is called descaling with less. Just to remind you, we're not scaling up, we're scaling down. Yes, I'm going to take another question.
All right. Does less specify or care where product requirements come from?
An interesting question. Well, it's a logical question. Let me pull up this just because I have it handy. I'm going to use it, but then I could just answer this question here. In large-scale Scrum, we strictly delineate between two channels of communication. Prioritization comes only through one channel, and this is a product owner. Clarification, this is the dotted snake here that is often trivialized and becomes busy and cumbersome within organizations that don't understand this. This is a very important catwalk. Teams talk directly to real customers and real users to get clarification on requirements. Now, requirements may come from different channels, but they get sifted through the product owner. Now, who does mechanics? It's a trivial question because in less product group, there's a lot of shared responsibility. But we can just simply say if a customer 5 or customer A or customer Z had a requirement they wanted to bring to a backlog refinement session, they would run it by a PO and say, do you think it's important? I think it's important. Can you please edit the backlog and compare with other requests from other people? So it's the same container, the same backlog. In fact, you can create some internal agreements that anyone can enter stuff in the backlog, but just make sure it's explicit and transparent so your product owner can jump on it and take a look soon enough. So clarification flows directly from customers and users, prioritization only through the product owner. Okay? And of course, these users and customers would be people that care about the product. They will be using that product. Real customers, real users, not managers, not PMO, not people that are, not technical managers, no.
Thanks, Gene. All right.
I'll take one more so we can break on the quarter past, yeah?
All right. Okay. The other question is, if there are 3 9-member feature teams, is the PBI getting estimated 3 times?
No, it doesn't. So let me give you a quick, it's like 5,000 feet view. So let me take a shortcut approach here. Review retrospective. I want to have a bigger screenshot here. Here it is, a refinement session, right? No, this is not. This is black and white. I want to get just give a sec. I'll take a PDF here. Now, you notice this pink box, right? Is beige box, depending what your color palette is. This is where team representatives, and again, it's a loaded statement. It requires more explanation, and even during a training session, we'll take a couple hours to discuss it. Team representatives decide very quickly on behalf of their teams which team is going to refine which item. Okay? This isn't at this juncture, it's a very short event, maybe 15-20 minutes. It just to decide who is going to actually refine it further. We really don't like the blue instance here because it means that a single team, for some reason, there are reasons why it may happen, does refinement on their own and is not participating in the yellow discussion. That's the way I usually frame it in training. That's what I'm gonna do tomorrow morning. We don't like yellow teams. We don't like blue teams. We like yellow teams. Why? Because everyone does things together. So this is really not an estimation place. There's only one time they can do this together. Of course, if they did this once and it doesn't feel like they have reached any consensus, they can refine, they can continue refining. Notice something, we got 5-10% of a sprint. So if we do this in the proper way, in large-scale Scrum, we usually do the whole day. It takes the whole thing. If we are all collocated, pre and post-COVID, you will be in the same room or in the same multiple locations with lots of video support. If it's during these times, it will most likely on a mirror board or mural board or some sort of a high-capacity in infinite canvas. But we don't do it multiple times redundantly. And if we have to do it more than once, it would be same people doing it, whoever is going to work on it. Okay? So on demand. Okay? So would that be okay to wrap now?
Yeah, if anyone had any more questions, you can email them at contact@expertagile.club. I'm also going to write that down over. So
absolutely. And I make it very transparent. People just drop me a note, and it's easy to. If they have any questions specifically on artifacts or reference, they can just go there and pick it up. Okay.
All right. Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining, folks.